I'm going to be talking about AI specific to cardiology today, but I want to talk about it at a general level because I want you to think about it. And if you remember only one thing, just remember the word workflow. This is all about how we change our workflows, improve care for our patients, improve operations for ourselves and our teams. And we might say there are three major areas: research AI, clinical and operational, teaching and learning. But today we're going to focus just on the clinical, just briefly. Now, Mount Sinai got into this a little bit on the early side. It was so early that we didn't call it AI back then. We called it big data. So we had our little big data group, and we would meet on a regular basis. And I'm just going to go over about three of the applications as an example of how we build AI into workflows. Doing this initially on inpatient, but I want you to be thinking about how it applies in your practices as well. So we'll start with a clinical deterioration algorithm. Now, you probably have heard of the medical early warning system, MUSE. You may have heard of other techniques for determining if people in a hospital are likely to have clinical deterioration and potentially need to be escalated to an ICU level of care. And actually, we published this article only this year. It was actually work that was done immediately prior to the pandemic. We'd hoped to enroll up to 6,000 patients, but in March 2020, it got a little crazy around here, so we had to stop enrollment. But still, with 2,800 patients, we were able to look carefully at what happened when we used an AI algorithm to activate our rapid response team and our nursing teams. And to just bring this to a very rapid conclusion and jump right to the results in a short talk, what you can see here is that we saw that as we activated clinical teams on 2 units, one primarily medical, one primarily surgical, and compared it to 2 additional units, one primarily medical, one primarily surgical, where we generated alerts but did not send them. In the units where we activated the alerts, lower level alerts got the nurses to increase vital sign monitoring to once an hour for about 4 hours. Higher level alerts activated the rapid response team. Over the course of an average 5-day length of stay, actually about 92% of patients on the active units had some level of activation. Remember, people who are left in hospitals are really sick these days. All of your easy stuff moved to the ambulatory platform a long time ago. But the most important thing to draw your attention to is section B here when we look at the secondary outcome in hospital of 30-day mortality. And you can see a point estimate of 24% reduction in mortality. Now, you might say, okay, great, you published an article, fist bump, let's get out of here and celebrate. But we actually have this now in live clinical practice, and it's fascinating to see how things are different in the actual workflow than they were in the research context. I would say that with the current workflow, what we see for our inpatients, many of them cardiology inpatients, that about 25% of the time we activate the rapid response team. They leave the intensive care unit now every day with a list of 15 patients to evaluate in our step-down units. 25% of the time, they do nothing. They say, okay, things look okay. About 25% of the time, they bring a patient to an ICU or write orders for rapid implementation of corrective therapies. About 25% of the time, they make recommendations. And interestingly, about 25% of the time, they have the first serious illness conversation with the patient, leading to a goals of care conversation and often to more of a hospice or palliative care approach. And as you know, in cardiology, that is one of the things that we're all working on, is what the role of hospice and palliative care should be and how we can move that upstream. Next, I'm going to mention malnutrition. Most cardiologists are not so focused on malnutrition, but I want to give it to you as an example of a workflow integration that really made sense for us. The thing that didn't work for Epic when they tried to do a sepsis prediction algorithm was they developed the algorithm on a cohort of patients in the Midwest, probably mostly white, mostly middle class. And then we tried to run it in the background to see if it would work here in Mount Sinai Hospital, which is on the border of the very wealthy Upper East Side and the very not wealthy East Harlem. And it didn't work at all. And so one of the things that's very important when you're building things into the workflow is, does it work at a local level? There's that aphorism, all politics is local. Well, maybe I'll make the extension, all AI is local too. So one of the things that was important with these receiver-operator characteristic curves, which I assume this audience has some familiarity, but the point is they were accurate to a level that made sense to implement clinically in the workflow in the 6 hospitals where we have Epic implemented in the health system. And by building malnutrition detection into the workflow of the dietitians, their order of the work list that they see in Epic every day when they come to work is altered by AI, such that the patients who are most likely to have severe protein-calorie malnutrition, which is really common, as you can see here, in hospitalized patients, we were able to triple the rate of diagnosis of that condition and to treat it. And interestingly, it also has another effect for a hospital. It's a major comorbid condition, so you get paid more. And it also helps in adjusting your risk-adjusted observed to expected length of stay and mortality, because you're appropriately assigning the right level of risk to a patient. Next, I'm going to mention delirium. Not something you think about so much, perhaps, in cardiology clinical practice, but oh my goodness, it's important, and I wanted to raise this one because of the fact that you have to constantly be bringing new tools into AI predictions. As you are doing this, as you're buying products, you have to think a little bit more carefully than you're just buying a product like a new catheter. You have to look under the hood a little bit here. And what we did was our previous CEO was a psychiatrist, and he was fascinated and scared by how the levels of delirium in hospitalized patients increased length of stay and were associated with worse outcomes. And so we put together a delirium team, and we tried to come up with a predictive algorithm internally to send them to the right patients, just as I explained in the malnutrition approach and in the clinical deterioration approach. But it didn't work so well. And the fact was, the structured data, laboratories, demographics, these classic things that we look at in an electronic record that are numeric or easily classified, didn't work very well at all. And what we had to do was to bring in natural language processing. And this is not addressing other issues like how we manage imaging data, how large language models are going to integrate. But the point is, new tools come about. No one even talked about large language models until 2 years ago. No one talked about natural language processing until 5, 6 years ago. The new tools actually help. And so to find out if someone has delirium or is about to develop delirium, the information was not in the structured data, the information was in the clinical notes. And so when, I guess that slide got hidden, but I'll just tell you the punchline of the story is that we went from a receiver-operator characteristic curve area of about 0.75, 0.78, which is barely sort of respectable, to 0.94, which is scary predictive, so much so we worried that we were overfitting the model until we actually looked at it. But the point is, there are data in different places. You will have data in your practice in images that are captured in the cath lab. You'll have data in clinical notes. You'll have data, if you work with them, in your patient's health apps. And so the data that come to you come from different directions, and creating good, valid, reliable AI predictive analytics that you build into your work streams requires you to think about those tools. Now I want to come close to the end here and talk about the danger. This is a study that was done by radiologists. Remember, radiologists are really, really threatened by AI. They feel like, oh my goodness, we're going to be replaced. And no, we don't replace people, but we can elevate them to a higher level. We can change their workflows. We can make them more efficient. But the knowledge and the direction of how we move in diagnostic imaging and interventional imaging is not going away. But radiologists were sort of threatened. So they did this study, which I thought was fascinating. In stage 1, they had 10 mammograms in random order with the correct diagnosis given by an AI algorithm to predict in these mammograms what the stage of the diagnostic category is as it relates to the likelihood of having breast cancer. And that's the sort of top of this slide. You see the 10 mammograms and everything was correct. In stage 2, they had 40 mammograms in random order. 12 out of the 40 had an incorrect diagnosis inserted on purpose. And what you saw when we looked at these 50 mammograms on this next slide was that when the right diagnosis was suggested on these left 3 slides here, you see in red and blue and gray that whether it was an inexperienced cohort, meaning residents, a moderately experienced cohort, meaning new attendings, and very experienced cohort, meaning people who look like me, then you see that they all did very well. But once you inserted the errors, and some people like the term hallucinations when you're talking in large language models, the trainees were really, really in trouble because you made the wrong diagnosis and you led them in the wrong direction. And you can see even in the most experienced, the likelihood of correct diagnosis was pulled down to 50%. So this means that we have an obligation as physicians to assure with mechanisms, whether that's, you know what it's like to overread an echo exam. This is something you do as a quality metric. An AI tool is like any other tool. You have to take that old expression we talked about in the Cold War, trust but verify. You must look at things very carefully, and you must maintain that level of skepticism that is important for us as physicians who care passionately about patient outcomes and care to do the right thing. So that's the cautionary tale, that just because you buy it, just because the company is doing well in the stock market, their promotional materials look great, they're very slick, they got it implemented in no time, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to give you the right answer. It's on us, the clinicians, to make sure that we do the right thing. So let me talk about lessons learned from what we've done clinically, initially in inpatients at Mount Sinai Hospital, spreading throughout our health system, and now approaching things that work not just in back office operations like finance, which is already happening in your organizations as well, but thinking about how it moves into the ambulatory environment. So the key thing, bring the right team to the right patient at the right time. When you start using AI to make diagnoses, you have to be careful. Once again, it's about bringing that right team and helping them. So the AI doesn't make the diagnosis in the implementations that we've put into place. It identifies those who are most likely to have that diagnosis, and then the clinical team does the right thing. Don't think of it as artificial intelligence. Make that mental leap and create in your own minds the concept of augmented intelligence that helps our staff achieve higher patient safety, quality, better experience, better healthcare economics. But once again, we are responsible. We bring a tool into practice. That workflow is our responsibility. And remember, the electronic health record may not be the entity or the platform that does the actual AI. In fact, in the case of Epic, they are getting there, but they're not getting there particularly quickly. So there are other tools that are available on the market, other tools that we can develop internally, but the electronic health record is the platform. You can't expect people to work in 5 or 6 different systems, so it's very important to think about how we integrate, how we communicate, and the electronic health record has become that platform for essentially all of us. So where are we going? Conversational AI, the omni-channel experience, it is really going to revolutionize something very important for us. I don't know about your organization, but if I were a betting person, I'd say that your patients have trouble with access. They have trouble finding that appointment for radiology, to getting the stress test scheduled, making that follow-up appointment with the cardiologist, getting the approval of their medication for their cardiovascular risk modification. It's a mess out there. And even people who are very connected into the health system struggle. And so that is the promise and something that we're taking on very seriously in terms of our health system's approach to the future. In terms of risks and potential solutions, just remember, we have to also be concerned about bias. If we train our data on biased data sets where wealthier people have better access to health care, and they're predestined to have better outcomes, we're not going to have very good predictive algorithms. So always, again, be skeptical, test it, make sure that every segment of the population you care for is getting an accurate and appropriate prediction. And if you don't get the workflow right, why is my partner in this the chief nursing informatics officer? It's because it's very easy for people to be threatened. And we can overcome that by making people who are on the front lines part of the conversation and part of the solution. And I think, that's where we ended up with a governance structure. This is what we have to be as the physicians. We have to be at the top of a governance structure where, whether it's research, whether it's teaching, whether it's clinical and operational, we have to have a full inventory of everything that's in our systems, and we have to have structures to make sure there is high quality and equitable application and accuracy that actually makes the lives of our patients and our staff better. So I want to end with the concept of multimodality. And this is the idea that right now we largely function off electronic health record data. We're moving more into imaging data, especially in radiology. But integrating the omics, the imaging, the electronic health record, that's the future. And it is on us, again, as leading clinicians, to be at the center of this conversation, be part of this, join organizations like the Consortium for Healthcare AI, CHAI, join organizations like TRAIN that's put together by Microsoft to focus on the operations of this, and be an advocate with your local governments that don't regulate us out of existence with AI before we actually exist. It's an obligation for us to be part of this discussion. We cannot put our heads in the sand. We have to be there and be the leaders. Thank you so much for letting me give this introductory talk.